Well, I think for sake of time, I'll go ahead and get going. We've had a pretty good turnout here so far, so that's great. Thanks everyone for showing up. I'm Eric Abrams with GeoDecisions. I'm going to be hosting, or I'm kind of the moderator for today's event. I'm in nice, I guess it's cloudy and getting colder central Iowa, so it's 33 degrees right now. It's supposed to get even colder. So, but it was almost 50 yesterday, so that was nice. So again, welcome to FME and Transportation. Let me kind of move on to the slides here. So I put this slide of me in there because John Aylen was hitting me up on LinkedIn and sending me messages like he's finding out all this interesting information about people. So I thought I just put a picture of me. Oh, it's actually cropped off, but that's me next to the future birthplace of Captain Kirk, which is in Riverside, Iowa, on the eastern side of Iowa. So if you ever come through Iowa, in the Iowa City area, and you're a Star Trek fan, you got to see the future birthplace of Captain Kirk. So it's right there at that location. I don't know how we know that, but it must be a time continuum. Maybe FME helps us determine all this, right? So, again, our agenda today, we're talking about the background and purpose. I don't think we have a poll today, did we, John?
No, I don't believe we do.
Oh, okay. Well, that shows you how informal we are, right? We're all friends here. So we'll just kind of skip the poll. I'll do a speaker introduction. David will do a presentation. We'll do a live Q&A and kind of wrap up. So we try to keep this to around a half hour-ish. You know, it could go 45 minutes. It could go a full hour. I know the Gistic and GeoDecisions people stick around till the last person leaves. So don't feel like, you know, you have to leave after a half hour. We like to hang out and talk too. So background purpose was this group was created by Gistic Research and GeoDecisions with the blessing of safe software. And it's really born out of the belief that community involvement, you know, benefits all. So the whole point of this is to really share information about how people use FME and safe technologies and crowdsourcing knowledge resources for the betterment of the GIS transportation community as a whole. All right. That's kind of our mission statement. Boy, we're getting a lot of people. David, you're popular today. Let's move on. So David submitted this picture, but then I found before this meeting the real picture in the upper left-hand corner, right? He cropped me out of it. So that means that David and I must go way back in time. So David going to introduce today David Runneals. He's going to be talking about FME best practices. I kind of put a little blurb about his description about troubleshooting workspaces and trying to figure out what to do, make your workspaces faster. You know, that's what David's going to talk about today. David and I go way back. I hired him at how old were you when I hired you to Iowa DOT?
I was a freshman. I was debated between going to Esri and going to you, but you sniped me before Esri could get an interview with me. So
I was a freshman in high school, right, David?
Yeah, no.
And what put David on my radar was he was spoofing our Track-A-Plow site at Iowa DOT on his own. It was own ArcGIS Align account. We're like, who is this guy? And then I thought it was some guy in his basement. Well, it was some guy in his basement. It was some 18-year-old kid or 19-year-old kid in his basement. David and I go way back. We worked at Iowa DOT together, and now he works for us over at GeoDecisions. So again, David's favorite transformer. Is this? I didn't ask you ahead of time. Is this still your favorite FME transformer manager? Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll talk about it today.
And your least favorite food is still kiwis? I'd
say so, probably, yeah.
Okay. And Dave and I are going out for barbecue next Wednesday. So, aren't we? In the little Luther, Iowa. If anyone looks up Luther, Iowa, there's one thing there, and that's a little barbecue joint. So, that's where we're going for lunch Wednesday. So, all right. So, now you got to know us all. And pretty soon I'm going to shut up here and David. So, we're wrapping up. Okay, everybody. We'll catch y'all later. So, no. So, David, if you want to go ahead and share the screen, I'm just going to turn it over to you, and it's your show.
Okay, Bo, I think you have to give me permissions. Or maybe you can, Eric. I need to be a co-host. Or John or Carol.
I believe I'm not actually a co-host right now. Carol, Eric, or Bo will have the permissions.
Oh, there we go.
Yeah, I just tried.
Awesome.
All these are different. There you go. You can't hear me because I'm back.
Cool. So yeah, like Eric will be talking about FME best practices, kind of going over my best practices document that I put together. Kind of, there's 4 main sections: general tips, organization, readers, writers, and of course, transformers. So in general, I guess some general tips that I've had across over the years. Always match the version of FME desktop to the version of FME server. Obviously, the newer versions of FME don't necessarily, although they're backwards compatible, may have newer transformers and readers and writers in them. So they don't always mesh very well with FME server. The thing that I found out after talking with Safe, I think it was last year or the year before, was that like most of us with Esri products, we generally wait till the .1 release, but with Safe and the release cycles is you don't have to wait for that .1 because all releases are tested thoroughly, and the .x I think are more bug releases, versus the .x releases are more new features and enhancements and stuff. I'm sure it looks like we have a decent representation of Safe, so I'm sure they can correct me if I'm wrong. And then another tip is implement validation checks so workspaces don't fail. And then going to the third point of determining how to handle rejected features, which is, it's kind of, I find it in creating new workspaces, more so what I do now, instead of editing existing workspaces, that is generally set by default, is it's always to terminate translation. So you have to figure out what those are. So if you're running translation and something gets output through the directed or through the rejected port, obviously your workspace will die and you'll have to rerun it versus continuing on. And so figuring out and doing the doing the validation checks beforehand help prevent those rejected feature issues down the line. Workspace organization is a really big one. I still kind of, I'll be honest, I struggle with this one still. I still haven't gotten it down pat, but there are some people that have better ideas and whatnot. Ultimately, the goal for this that I set for myself, and you should set for yourself as well, is being able to have a coworker troubleshoot and understand your issues in under an hour. Think of if you're not there, if you're on vacation, you're out sick, and crap hits the fan, well, they need to be able to get it working. Kiss it, right? Not that kiss. Keep it simple, silly. Don't overthink your workspaces. Keep them simple. Don't make them more complex than they really need to be. Develop standards and best practices for your organization. I know that there's out on the FME community, there's some samples of templates. So if you develop a template, you can use that for all of your deliverables. I'm sure that several of you that work on the private side, even on the public side as well, have, let's say, RFP type templates, right? This is just another template that you can put together for your organization to more consistently deliver. Using bookmarks for grouping distinct sections, components, and subtasks together. I do that quite a bit. You can minimize them as well. So if you have a big section of your code with lots of transformers, you can collapse it and keep your workspace more clean. And really, again, bookmarks are great for compartmentalizing subtasks and drawing your eye to sections. And they also pop up on the in the toolbar as well, so you can easily and quickly navigate to them. Add annotations. Think of annotations as comments in your code, right? You're not gonna just write code and not put any comments in there. It's really annotations, bookmarks, Those can be used for sort of commenting in your code and stuff and grouping things together. Using junctions, tunnels, hidden connections, or additional vertices to make your lines more easier to follow. And again, helping with keeping your workspace clean and consistent. And then finally, I found Mark posted this back in December. I think it was December or maybe it was January. But he came up with a bunch of colors for bookmarks. So you can go to that. All this presentation will also be posted on our FME T LinkedIn group as well. So you can click on links after that. Now to handle what everyone loves to do, metadata for your workspace parameters. A lot of times these get forgotten about, right? You name your file as your file name, but you don't necessarily remember to fill in your name, description, the history and help sections. This is a really great place to put, especially in the help section, document like maybe dependencies and even in the description as well, dependencies, all sorts of good things that if you were to ever leave, that the help is there to help people troubleshoot workspaces and that kind of stuff, along with history, being able to define what you've changed throughout time. I forgot to throw this in here as well, but along with that history is to do versioning as well. So I can talk about that, I guess, near the end. But it also relates back to the history, right? So keeping versions of your files as you go through them and edit and modify them and work on them. And then if you mess up, you can always revert back to a working version or the last known working version. Figure out how you're gonna deal with rejected features, kind of like I alluded to earlier, right? Are you gonna terminate if you get rejected features, or are you gonna continue? Sometimes you need your database to have data in it, so maybe you continue in those cases and notify someone that the data is bad or invalid. And then finally, set your Python scripting if applicable. With the Python scripting, we ran into this several years ago. Be mindful of the different versions of Python, because especially if you're running it on, like, let's say FME server, where it'll preload a version of Python, but it may not be the right version. Now you're dealing with multiple Python versions, which get potentially kind of messy. On the reader side, the goal that you should set for yourself is only read in the features and attributes that you need in the order that you need them. So think about on the very first one, for disabling readers and feature types that aren't being used. If you don't disable them, they'll actually read in data that you don't necessarily need. So making it, I mean, there's no point in doing that. You just waste time running your workspace. Using databases and web connections where possible, right? So this makes updating accounts easier because you just update with a click. And it's easy to move accounts back and forth and share them with users and stuff. Oop. I guess these next two are really big, right? So exposing only needed attributes. An easy way to think of this is that each of your attributes is a weight and a feature is a horse. The more weight or attributes that you put on your horse, the slower your workspace will run. And there's no point in exposing attributes that you really don't need either. And it makes your workspace cleaner as well. And that leads into the next one of exposing only your needed features. Similar to the previous bullet, the less records you read in, the quicker your workspace will run. A tip, kind of, I guess, going to the next bullet of letting your database do the hard work before reading the data in, be using where or select statements to define features prior to reading them in. And ideally, if you're working in a specific geographic area, put a bounding box in, right? You don't need to read all the other features outside of your study area. So why read them in if you're not going to do anything with them? Working with the database as well, use complex yet simple select, where, group by, join statements before reading the data in. Letting a database do what it's there to do, right? It's there to process data. Otherwise, if you read the data in, you have to throw a sorter on the data if you want to sort it, or a feature merger, or a joiner, and that takes time within your FME process. So let the database, again, do what it's meant to do. You can also pre-filter your geometry. So if you only want to show, let's say, lines or points or polygons, run include that in your where statement as well. You don't need to read in features with bad geometry only to have FME reject them, right? And then the last one, use the max features to read parameter when prototyping. That one can reduce the number of features and greatly speed up the speed of your workspace while prototyping. Remember, to set that back to clear that out before you publish it up to FME server, or publish it out as a final workspace. And then the last bullet, really work to add the value added data to the source data set. Why rerun your data every night to get, let's say, mileposts added to a data set that only gets new records added to them, right? So why are you running a data set over and over and over again each night to add something that you've already added or calculated the previous day? So now on the writer side, ultimately the goal is to make it fast. Using database and web connections where possible. I know that's been around for several years, and it makes things much easier to share with other users. Setting the right order so the writer with the most records is first. This allows your memory to be reduced, because the features that you write are stored in memory, and the faster you can write them off, the faster they can be dropped from memory. So the more efficient you are ultimately with memory. Update versus insert. This one is a big one that I found that in my previous area, working with row conditions. Why rewrite, if you're going to update row conditions, let's say every 10 minutes or something else every 10 minutes, and they have consistent geometry, you don't need to update that geometry if it's not changing. So it's faster to just do an update with, let's say, attributes than it is to do a truncate and then reload an entire data set with geometry and attributes. But make sure that it's appropriate, right? So in some cases it is, in some cases it isn't. And then figuring out if you want to truncate using FME or via a script. Using FME, it's a little bit slower, but it allows rollbacks to happen. So again, if you need to have data in your data set, whether your FME job succeeds or fails, that's important consideration. But leveraging a truncate table SQL script within SQL or Python is a lot faster, but it doesn't allow rollback. So again, considerations to think about. On the transformer side, the ultimate goal is, again, KISS, right? Keep it simple. So focusing on reduced duplicate or similar transformers. So this gets into my favorite transformer, the attribute manager. So the attribute manager can combine the attribute creator, attribute remover, attribute renamer, and a bunch of the other attribute, or I guess even some of the like date time formatting ones, into a single transformer. And that when the attribute manager was released, I was pretty excited and started replacing everything. Using the least amount of Python scripts as possible. Again, reducing your dependencies and your issues with Python version mismatching. And the final one, Fortunately, Don, it doesn't look like Don is on, but I'm sure some of the safers will rejoice when seeing this one. If Don says 10 transformers or less, that means using the fewest transformers possible. So now some tools that I found to help you dial up your FME maturity. The first one being an automated geospatial health system. It allows you to share current system and service statuses with your customers via a simple dashboard, and also provide alert notifications using rules. So you can take a peek into your GIS services, your data sources, or even your FME workspaces as well running on FME server. You can build a health check process, or you can always save some time and work with someone like Geodecisions or Gistic or another safe partner to help you set up a robust, mature health check system as well. Then there's always R-Test, which I haven't really dived into this one or the next one too much. But this one seems really positive from a test framework. It comes from a safe partner overseas, Runneals. They just released it last year. And it's really providing, if you're in the software side of the business, there's test harnesses and test frameworks. Well, this is the test framework harness for FME workspaces. So it helps to ensure that the right data is output no matter what. It reduces the correction time during maintenance and troubleshooting. It also helps with increasing compliance in production, and ultimately it reduces time once you get to really use it. And then there's the dataset validator that just got released this year. It takes two sets of data and compares them against each other. So a good scenario for this is comparing what your test output is expected to be, and what your actual output is expected to be. And this also comes from another safe partner. But in the end, all that matters is that you develop standards for yourself and your organization that you can consistently and easily follow. Because if you have standards there that aren't necessarily easy to follow, then there's no point in having those if they're not going to be followed, right? So here's a link to the my guide that I put together. I guess it's now what, 3 or 4 years old, but everything still definitely applies to this version. And there's also, forgot to mention it as well, I guess 2 things. First one being, if you're using FME server, definitely enable the version control and push it up to, let's say, GitHub, so that you always have somewhere else that's storing your workspaces, but make sure to obviously password protect that and not to share it publicly. And then, what was I gonna say? Yeah, so do the version control is very important. So are there any questions, discussions? Looks like there's been some in chat. You can take Sienna's easy way to get 10 transformers, and that's creating custom transformers, claiming it only uses 10. Feel free to definitely unmute yourselves or type in the chat questions. Yep. Or
yeah, can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
I was having audio problems earlier, so I switched to my Chromebook. So all right.
Let's see all these will be put up on our LinkedIn page. This presentation will, along with the video once it gets done.
So Wendy B asked, can you share the info on the second testing slide?
So I can. This one, the R-Test, I think that would be the second one. Has anyone used around on here? have used our test or have used or have other tools for increasing maturity?
Yes, Dave, we used in the past for our test, but we never later stick onto it. We kind of for experiment using, testing for the custom transformers we do. I think that context is really helpful. Yeah.
Yeah, I could definitely see where that would be really good to have that.
Yeah. I have a comment, David. I think you presented a quite comprehensive list of things. Yeah. And at the end of the day, I think just picking and choosing the ones that you feel comfortable with and run with it. And
Yeah.
you just need to start standardizing it. It's, as you mentioned, creating your own standard and just stick with it and focusing on, especially in a team environment. I know it's kind of hard for most of practitioners. You only have 1 or 2 people working on it, but sometimes in our case, we have 3 or 4 people working on the same thing. We end up spending quite a bit of time in recent months doing code review, and John and Carol, certainly has something to say regarding that. We can share our experience in going through that. And I was pretty bad in terms of doing annotation. In fact, yesterday, in the last couple of days, and Carol was digging through one of my workspaces, and she had trouble. Then I was trying to take it over. Then I couldn't. I just couldn't do it, in short time. I needed really concentrated time to doing that. It shows how important to have workspace well documented. One of the good things we always say, hey, FME is self-documenting process. It is true. It's much better than otherwise using whatever code you write, but still having good annotation, great presentation of your flow diagram. If you think that's as a flow diagram, making it pretty, and even using color coding standard, it saves a lot. Yeah, so.
I'd like to add to that, Bo. I know David's working with another customer of ours, and he's created some workspaces. And when he showed them to me, I'm like, I don't understand what they're doing. Yeah, I see the transformers. So then David went ahead and started putting annotation in there. So when the customer sees it, they may not know FME, but they can logically follow what's happening by putting that annotation in.
Yeah, that's a good thing.
Yeah, and I'll say, as someone that for the longest time, I didn't really do a good job at that documentation piece or even the organization piece. And when I switched jobs, that was something that I had to I spent probably a good chunk of my last month or so doing, right? Like tying all that up, making it so that someone else could understand what exactly is happening. Because it's like, I, as the SME of person that wrote it, knows what's going on, but does someone else know what's going on? And that's I'd say one of the most important things to consider when you're maybe not when you're developing it, and even if you are really short on manpower and stuff, but near the end of the project, that's definitely something that should always be done, because it's better to do it then than it is to wait 2 or 3 years and then have to do it.
Absolutely, yeah. I also like to add, whoever is doing FME, you are a developer, you are a coder. So for coders, and having a code review is essentially production, professional development is a indispensable kind of step. We're trying to mimic that over here, and we have John and Carol and I will just tearing each other's workspace apart and questioning and doing that. Because only when that is done, we can ensure, because none of the FME processes are static. They are always growing, enhancing. and that can ensure more future sustainability. Because as the FME is getting to really a central part of the data mechanism within the DOTs, we feel like we need to beef that up from process-wise. Yeah.
Yeah, and then to go on Sierra's point, I think consideration. So when you're using custom transformers, and I know that I didn't really do anything with custom transformers for quite a few years, until 2 or 3 years ago, maybe I really got into it. But using custom transformers is a good method to, if you have a process that you need to do within multiple workspaces, creating a single custom transformer that does the same repetitive task is better than, I would say, copy pasting.
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, the mantra of 10 or 12 transformers less is predicated on that don't repeat yourself, right? That's the predicated on building custom transformers, essentially factor and refactor, extracting the common components that make sense, still contained, being reusable, using modularization, modularized part. And that's again, a very basic development principle. Yeah, don't repeat yourself, extract, abstract as much as possible. You're building onto essentially like a Lego. Just like transformer being a Lego, you don't need to know what is behind each and every transformer, which I'm pretty sure has hundreds and thousands of code and many libraries linked to it, right? You won't have to deal with it, but you can create your own custom transformer. And we've been building at ADA, and three of us mostly, and building a plethora of custom transformers to sustain the development effort, supporting effort, if you will. Yeah.
So I'll also throw, as a couple other tools, I'll also put them in the links when we get this posted. I know this is 5 years out of date now, but this definitely is a good place to start. You can easily point your workspaces. This is actually a FME, I think, workspace itself, that it runs through your workspaces to provide ideas on best practices. There's also one, maybe Sienna knows where it's at, that one of the SAFE people sent me 3 or 4 years ago, maybe 5 years ago. And it's where you can, again, run your workspaces through it. And it tells you how many transformers you have, like how many attribute managers do you have, how many attribute creators do you have, and then you can kind of use that to fine tune your workspace, right? Like I mentioned before, you can now combine multiple attribute transformers into a single attribute manager, making things simpler and easier. And I also have an idea that I'll also post a link to that you should vote for, which is being able to put comments on within the attribute manager. So now that you can do like combine multiple transformers into a single attribute manager, being able to, again, commenting what you're doing, especially some of them where you can do conditional. The conditional ones can get quite complicated. Yeah.
So David, I have a kind of a question that's a little off the topic you've been talking about. You mind if I ask?
Yeah.
So we're talking about best practices here. So if I'm new to FME, what would be a best practice to get started? Let's say I've seen people use it. I'm not quite understanding what it is. How would I go ahead starting to use FME?
Oh,
What would be
goodness.
your best practice? What you know today?
Yeah, I'd say start and just play around with it and figure it out. I think that's when you threw this back to me in like 2014, it took a little bit until my mind clicked around what's all happening. between the FME community, the training courses that they're now rewriting. Some of the introduction ones are definitely really good to get started around that. But I would say the biggest one that you can ingrain in your mindset from if you're starting out brand new is that documentation piece. Being consistent with your documentation, using attributes, bookmarks to group things together consistently, and then also along with the documentation is that workspace metadata, right? So filling out the name, filling out the description of what the workspace does, filling out your history, right? You can leave your mark in history in the history.
And then Safe on the on like learning side, Safe has a full library of free videos, training sessions and stuff that you can get on safe.com. If I remember right. So.
Yep, and then they also have a great their presentations area is also really great that has all sorts of presentations from past user conferences and world tours and world fairs.
They've also started something new called the FME Training Academy, which has targeted learning paths, which kind of like if you have a specific goal in mind, the academy can help you navigate like a series of training steps to reach that end goal.
All right, other questions, anyone?
And feel free to always message me on LinkedIn or email me. My door is always open.
So let me go ahead and take control, David, if you want to. Oh, I guess I can force it. So let me go here. Then we kind of hit the wrap up screen, then we'll kind of stick around. And can you see that screen okay?
Yes.
Okay. So again, thanks, David, for that information. It was great. There's David's email address. If you have questions, make sure to get them there. Our next event is actually at GIST in Charleston, South Carolina. So there'll be a conference down there. If you're not familiar, if you're in transportation and you're not familiar with the GIST conference, it's probably the premier GIS conference for transportation professionals. So if you're in a DOT, work with roads, things like that, this is the place to be. So that'll be Charleston. And we're having a SIG, special interest group session on April 20th from 12:30 to 1:30, where people there are going to get together, talk FME, and we don't know what the agenda is. We just got notice yesterday, Bo and I, that we got approved for this SIG meetup at GIST. So that's pretty exciting. So
yeah, that's wonderful. And today I also got some news that New York State DOT Kevin Hunt, pending approval, he's interested in talking about New York's state of New York exploring a work zone data feed using FME.
oh yeah, yep.
Yeah, so it is even possible if, well, maybe even next month, if people are interested, we could certainly, if we couldn't make that arrangement, we might have a, short, demo, ask him to share with their perspective.
Yep, that'd be really good to see. If Kevin gets to travel, I don't think that New York's allowed him to travel for a while, so hopefully he'll get really go down.
Yeah, they don't even allow him to make any presentation without any approval, seem to be. So even for FMET, I was really, really surprised. Yeah, this is such a kind of just conversation. They don't, they need approval. Just amazes me.
So, okay, that kind of finishes our official presentation. So the rest of us will stick around here. If anyone wants to ask questions, feel free to unmute. And we'll do our best to kind of chat. Once everyone's gone, we'll disappear too. So again, thanks a lot, David. Thanks a lot, everyone, for attending. And hopefully we see some of you down in Charleston in middle of April. Right. I don't like this camera angle. I got two going here. So let me turn on my other camera. Let me turn this camera off so you don't have to see me twice. Oh, you probably can't. Oh, look at that.
You're struggling with technology today, Eric.
This is horrible. This is horrible.
You just need to
So,
restart your computer.
I don't know. I think it's Zoom. So I got two keyboards. I started typing on this other keyboard on this. Oh, you can't see that because I'm my other camera. Yeah. And I'm like, no, that's not where I want to type because I got to type on this keyboard for. So, all right. I don't know if we're going to have any other discussion.
Everyone's so quiet.
Yeah, it was. Everyone's eating their lunch. I suppose West
Yeah.
Coast people, right? So,
David,
So-
how many workspaces would you say you've created that have less than 10 transformers?
Oh, that is a great question.
Probably like 10 maybe.
And can you give an example of maybe like what the most complex workspace you've been able to do? Like what the most complex task you've been able to do in that 10 transformer limit?
So most of them are, I've actually have a couple that I did that were only like what, 2 transformers maybe. And those
And
ones
a
are
reader
basically,
and a writer.
yeah, but they were reading from, they were for row condition. They're the like the Midwest row condition. So it's basically pulling from a JSON or XML feed, using a feature merger to merge it with a file that I had pre-processed with a unique key with the object ID, and then an attribute manager to do some renaming and stuff, and then to update ArcGIS Online service.
I think in recent month, I mean, about a couple of months ago, when we decided to do code review, John developed a examiner, workspace examiner that we customized to identify, to search many interesting, artifacts, so we know where to pinpoint, where to focus on fixing. So, John, maybe you can share a little bit about your perspective in developing how it is being used.
And
I was
really
actually-
quick, a reminder to everyone is that if you ever crack open a FMW file, all that it is XML. Again, I think Don's made some puns about this, I'm sure, but of how he loves XML and stuff. But I mean, it's really all it is XML.
And I was actually about looking at my workspace examiner right now, so I can share it if you guys are interested in seeing it.
Sure.
I think it's worth sharing, John. It's pretty great and very useful.
Can you guys see my screen over here?
Yep.
Let me find out and get back to it.
So I assume that this kind of pulls from what
So essentially, yeah, and I'll walk you through like kind of what this is really quick. It's this huge list of things you can search. So it starts off by specifying a folder that, the main project folder. So in our case, I specify our production folder, which has our automations, our bridge stuff, our climate reports, our general stuff for the highway log. And what it does is it recursively reads that folder. Well, it can recursively, it has a toggle for recursive or not. And then it reads the XML from all of those files and then does a series of tests against them. And so you can also specify directories to ignore. You can specify one specific workspace to target if you just are interested in one thing. And then you give it a directory where you want it to write these reports out to. You can aggregate everything into a single report or have it split into all of these different reports that you see on my screen. And then you could select report types. So, and David, I actually built this based off of the best practices link you had sent me a long time ago, but I found that the best practices were really generic and weren't really that helpful in doing what I wanted. So Here we can generate statistics for transformers for the entire directory, have them grouped by directory or have them grouped by directory in Workspace. We can genericize these, and so it'll merge everything into a category of a transformer, reader, and writer. Same with the feature reader writers, it'll group those with readers and writers, or we can have it explode into individual transformers. You can list custom transformers to figure out where you have embedded or linked transformers, and you can also specify a regex clause if you're looking for a specific transformer to figure out every workspace it's being used in. You can identify transformers by workspace that need to be upgraded, look for missing workspace histories, missing workspace descriptions, and then it even goes into reporting on the path types for your input-output features, whether these are local disk, UNC path, URLs. And then if it's a local disk or UNC path, you can actually check the existence of those files with a small Python script. And then you can also do a bunch of wildcard searching. So searching for input-output features. We have 200 plus workspaces. And so sometimes it's nice to know where the specific table is used. And then we can also search for attribute names. Like we know that this is named something in this specific workspace, but sometimes we have object ID uppercase and sometimes it's object ID lowercase, or sometimes it's route ID without an underscore. So we can search all that. And then we can also search in published parameters, including the parameter name and the default value if we're looking for something there. And then the end result of that becomes this. And so we get our workspace statistics. And so for our overall statistics, the entirety of this directory, we have this many transformers, this many testers. And, I chose to do every single one here, but we can also have them grouped by directory. And so, we can see that this is how many we have in this general directory. And then somewhere along this line, I believe we'll also have a group by directory workspace. Utility workspaces, it'll be somewhere down by the bottom, but essentially we can choose one of these or have them all. So within each workspace, how many we have and exactly of what type of transformer exists. Then we have our workspace overview and descriptions. So every workspace that's missing its description with its directory, the workspace name, where it's stored. And then past that, we have our workspace descriptions where they have a description. So we can all in one place see the description of every workspace that we've created here and figure out what they do. Same thing for workspace history. We have the ones that are missing. I don't list the workspace history in this report. I thought the overviews are more important to list than the history, but that's an easy change. And we have our upgradable transformers grouped by directory. So within this directory, this workspace has this many upgradable, and then it also says whether they're in the main workspace or if they're inside of a custom transformer and which custom transformer they're in. And then just simply how many we have to go upgrade in each of these workspaces every time we migrate to a new version of FME. And we have
for that one, where do you get the upgrade, the current version numbers?
So it's actually a property of the XML. There's a current version and max version. And so if your current version is less than the max version, then you inherently know. And that's something I should also iterate here. This is actually super easy. So this first feature reader, it actually just gets a list of my directory and file path names. And it's got a constraint here for, I forgot where I set it. There's a constraint here that's an FMW, FMT, or FMX file. So it only gets the directory paths of those files. I forget where in the parameters you set that. And then we just do some simple filtering here. Either we're ignoring specific directories or we're wildcard searching a specific one. And then FME actually has this FME workspace reader. So this actually reads the FME workspaces and extracts their XML formats into all of these different attributes here. And this might be kind of hard to see on my screen, but it breaks it out into annotations, bookmarks, breakpoints, connections, feature type, format attributes, parameters. Then we have transformer parameters. So it's not grouped very well. And there's a lot of times when you have to take things from like 4 streams and merge them together to get the information you need. But it's certainly possible to get most of the information you need out of this. And then from here, things get grouped into the bookmarks of directory statistics, searching for inputs, listing transformers, identifying upgradable, and obviously trying to reuse the same ports where possible without having it too cumbersome here. Overview, history, UNC paths, attribute names, and published parameters. So the next one is looking at our input output paths. And so we can see here, we actually have a UNC path we use. And since we have so many people using this, not all of our paths are the same. So we try to standardize using a UNC path rather than local disk paths. But, clearly something changed. Our GDM events one geodatabase no longer exists at this path. So we'll have to go back to this workspace and figure out why what this data set should have been and where it went to. And then we can see our existing paths. And then that's also grouped by workspace. And then we have our URL paths, which we don't check for existence, but we just list that to know that, we're using a URL here instead of anything local. And then our FME parameters. So these are derived at runtime, and there's no way in the XML to define what that is because it doesn't show us that default value for some reason on some of these parameters. So, and then we have our output data sets, our non-existent paths again. This XLS file is missing, along with whatever these are supposed to be. And this is likely because this XLS file would have been date time stamped with that current date. And obviously at runtime of this, it doesn't know what the current date of that was the last time it was run. So you got to take these outputs with a grain of salt. But then again, it lists our existing data sets, where it found them and what's still valid. And then if we have any non-locally or like local disk paths, to report those. And then we have our linked and custom transformers grouped by directory and workspace again, so we can see where we have embedded transformers that we might want to go back and make sure they're linked so they get upgraded as we upgrade transformers. Then we also show where they're linked. And then this is, we have a wildcard search in here as well. So we could type in LRS geocoder into that wildcard and see every workspace across every directory where this custom transformer is being used. And then we've got our input output feature types. So in this case, we were looking for a specific database table we knew that we needed. We couldn't figure out what processes used it. And so we were able to actually find the workspace here that had got archived and restored, and we couldn't find this workspace. And so we were able to find the workspace based off of searching for the table we knew that was used within it. And then same thing for the attribute search. In this case, it actually found its own workspace. So my workspace examiner found itself because I had put the parameter of this table as a parameter. So the only place that this was used in a parameter was the workspace I was calling it from at the time. But that's kind of been instrumental in Gistic's code review process. I was tasked with going back and standardizing all of these features and figuring out where we had these differing attributes and where we had different attribute names and parameter names and stuff. And so this has been a really, really great help in finding missing data sets and identifying upgradable transformers and really having a targeted review process for us to go back and look for things to correct here.
That's really cool. Thanks for sharing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can say it's been extremely useful. The last few weeks, I've been spending some time in some FME workspaces. Sorry, UPS scared me. I've been spending time in old FME workspaces that were developed before I joined Gistic. So, I don't really know my way around them. The annotations aren't necessarily great. And it's been very helpful to use the output of John's process in order to sort of decipher what's going on.
I think from a documentation standpoint, it's really good. Maybe I could see it as overwhelming for some of the newer FME users, but for the
Seasoned.
Yeah, for the seasoned ones and for the ones that really, again, want to increase their maturity, that's a good thing to have around to be able to do that automation.
We do have a question there.
Yeah, it looks. Yeah,
when did we
all
get the
this will be up on the LinkedIn
Yep.
group.
Yep.
Yeah, it generally takes us about a day to get this posted, Hong. But once we get it, the recording takes like an hour to process after it ends. Then we'll download it, publish it to YouTube, and then Carol will throw it into that LinkedIn group.
All right. Well, I think we'll call it a day. I got a 1 o'clock meeting I need to get to, 1 o'clock my time. Some people are still in morning in Arizona there. So anyway, well, again, thanks a lot, everyone, for making it today. And I'm going to jump off here. So if you guys got to stick around, I'll catch y'all later.
Thanks, Eric.
Thanks.
David,
Thanks, everyone.
Bye-bye.
it's going to be pushed publicly to YouTube, so that video can be posted pretty much anywhere.
No, I meant like your workspace thing.
Oh yeah, that is my intention at a certain point. But the one thing that I really want to do that I haven't done is embedding the HTML reporting in a custom transformer so I could reuse it. Because so guess how many transformers exist in that workspace right now?
It's probably a bunch on that or on the HTML report side.
Just to take a guess at a number, how many do you think exist?
Probably like 250.
It's actually 400 more than your recommended 10. So there's 410 transformers that exist in that workspace. Yeah, so but you know, it doesn't do a whole lot of data translation. It's mostly just extracting, grouping things together, and then formatting them. So even scanning our directory of 200 workspaces across, there's actually 500 files across like 30 folders. And if you do it without FME caching enabled, it takes a handful of minutes, maybe 2 or 3 minutes. So just for a simplicity standpoint, I think, you know, it could be a lot simpler in terms of figuring out how to group those things together. But one of the major issues is that I chose specific ways of grouping items. Some are grouped by directory, some are grouped by directory workspace, and some are grouped just by workspace. And I haven't been able to figure out a way to make the toggle inside of a custom HTML transformer route them appropriately, because you have to do an HTML formatter to an HTML report generator to another formatter to another report generator to group these things into their individual nesting boxes into a final document. And it's really cumbersome the way that FME handles the HTML report generation. So there might be a simpler way of just, you know, putting this inside of an XLS file instead of doing an HTML report. But currently it took 3 minutes and 35 seconds to run across every directory on that network attached storage drive. So it's not terrible performance. It's just a little cumbersome if you want to go to troubleshoot something.
Yeah. Cool.
Yeah, I mean, if there's interest, then certainly that'll be shared to the FME community once I finalize a couple more things. I'm still finding a little bit of bugs here and there, like my initial toggle for ignoring a directory only worked if you chose to ignore a directory. If you chose not to ignore a directory, it didn't read anything. So I just fixed that yesterday, actually, or maybe it was the day before. But yeah, it's certainly been instrumental in like reviewing our FME processes that we have here and trying to go back and figure out, like, you know, no one really did any best practices like you had mentioned, especially for descriptions. And so we had a bunch of cryptically named workspaces that had been created 3 years ago by people who no longer work here. And obviously reaching out to someone 3 years later to ask what the intent of this workspace is they wouldn't remember either. So it was going back and then having to annotate everything and then add descriptions back in, so whoever came next would know what the heck this process was designed to do and what it wrote to and where it read from and all that stuff. So
Yeah, definitely understand that one. Awesome. I think that's an hour. So
Thanks, guys.
thank you everyone for joining.